nation to serve its own agenda. As a permanent member of the Council, the U.S. should be ashamed and disgraced by its own words and deeds. We urge the U.S. to change course at an early date and engage constructively in the work of the Council. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, President. To be frank, when we heard about this meeting on Ukraine being requested by our Western colleagues, there was a fleeting thought in our minds. We thought that the reason for this was the fact that at the start of July, we received a poignant letter from a group of Ukrainian political prisoners addressed to the Security Council President. Let me remind you that it was signed by well-known politicians, human rights defenders, civil servants, and MPs who are today prisoners of the Zelensky regime. For instance, Elena Berezhnaya, Vyacheslav Boguslayev, Vitaly Godina, Artem Dmitruk, Alexander Dubinsky, Oleg Kulinich, Miroslav Oleshko, Alexander Oleynikov, Yuri Rabucha. You all had an opportunity to read that letter and to see for yourself that the number of political prisoners in Ukraine runs into the thousands. Constitutional norms and laws are not being implemented. People are being put behind bars for, and here I quote, calling for peace and the holding of elections, for opposing the war between Slav peoples, for their political and religious convictions, for criticizing the forced mobilization, and for their active civil stance, end of quote. Ukrainian political prisoners are calling on the Security Council to achieve a repeal, and here I quote again, of all illegal sanctions imposed since the start of the war on Ukrainian citizens. For instance, unconstitutional and repressive means of political persecution, end of quote. So it's not just a letter, it's a cri de coeur. Now, back then, we didn't draw the Council's attention to this document to avoid giving our foes a pretext to try and portray all of this as Russian propaganda, as they always do in such cases. Think no further than the fact that in January 2024, Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen, was tormented to death in a Security Service of Ukraine cell, whose HR revelations were written off as Russian propaganda by the Kiev regime. Starting in 2014, any criticism of the Ukrainian government, according to what they say is Russian propaganda. This unsophisticated logic persists to this day. The forced mobilization, which the human rights defenders mentioned in their letter, is also, according to the Kiev posse, a concoction of the Kremlin. Yet all Ukrainians know that Zelensky's draft officers, the Territorial Centers for Recruitment, or TCRs, well, they're literally abducting people in broad daylight on the streets, in malls, pharmacies, and sports clubs. In doing so, they're using the harshest, at times inhumane methods. Hundreds, if not thousands, of cases have been reported of draftees being killed or maimed. All Ukrainians are talking about this, but the authorities deny it. There's a plethora of videos on social media where men are being nabbed in the streets. They're being ripped from their families, badly beaten, pushed into buses, frequently leaving their small children alone in the street. And Ukrainian civil servants are calling this, cynically calling this, scenes staged by the Moscow film studio. If we believe the Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainians are queuing up to go to the front. Can you imagine what it's like for ordinary Ukrainians to listen to such vile lies? However, recently, this system of collective lying and covering up for each other faltered. Staff at one such draft center in Transcarpathia, during one of their raids, seriously injured a 45-year-old man, József Shibentiev, an ethnic Hungarian who's a citizen of both Ukraine and Hungary. As a result, he ended up in hospital and died after a few weeks. And this despite the fact that Mr. Shibestien was drafted but then deemed unfit for duty for health reasons. There are hundreds of such cases in Ukraine. They are the norm for the so-called Zelensky concentration camp. That's what Ukrainians are calling their own country. Yet, for our Western colleagues, this topic is taboo. This legal free-for-all is something all European and US human rights defenders aren't talking about. They've been ordered to never speak ill of Ukraine. And this poor soul, Mr. Shibestien, no one would have found out about his fate. But, unfortunately for Zelensky and his sponsors, he turned out to be a Hungarian. Thus, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary protested decisively against the killing of their citizen and demanded official explanations. In response, the Ukrainians said that supposedly the draftee had attempted to flee and then died in hospital of natural causes. Of course, the Ukrainian side, just like in many other cases, despite the obvious facts, refused to bear any responsibility for the man's demise. These lies, of course, did not satisfy Budapest, and the scandal rages on. President, it's a good thing we have Hungary, which takes a principled stance. Hungary does not want to, in contrast to the overwhelming majority of other EU countries, does not want to turn a blind eye to the dictatorship in Ukraine, but who will defend the other unfortunate souls who have been forcibly mobilized. Those who the regime, steeped in lies, led by the Kiev princeling, those who are being thrown into the meat grinder to further Western geopolitical interests. For instance, there's an elderly woman from the city of Myriv in Kharkiv region. Recently, she tried to stop the draft office from taking away her son. She clung on for her life to the minibus full of conscripts, preventing it from leaving. But draft officers pushed her harshly, and as a result, she was unconscious, lying in the middle of the road. Images of this abuse caused outrage across Ukraine. Try to guess what Zelensky's accomplices said in response. You're right, this was all characterized as Russian propaganda. Ukrainians are now used to the fact that getting justice and punishment for all those violating all legal norms, including the Constitution, is impossible. In those rare cases where criminal cases are initiated against draft office staff because they're abusing authority, the State Bureau of Investigations, which conducts pre-trial investigations, in that case, that investigations office does not find any crimes. They say no crime has been committed. What are ordinary people left to do, those who don't want to go and fight? Increasingly, we're seeing them blocking roads, blocking settlements, and not letting draft officers, who they deem cannibals, to enter their towns and cities. Ukrainians absolutely hate staff of these draft officers who are known as politsai in common parlance, the term used for fascist punishers during the occupation of Ukraine. Hate and despair of Ukrainians has reached such a point that they're publishing and sending to the Russians the military coordinates of draft officers and celebrating when we strike them. This is what the former comedian, a self-styled dictator of all Ukraine, has achieved. President, when preparing for today's meeting, we were expecting that Western cheerleaders of Ukraine will at last say that the persecution of canonical Orthodox Christians in Ukraine has reached such a high point. This, given the fact that on the 2nd of July, the Ukrainian president issued a decree stripping the primate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Onufry, from stripping him of his Ukrainian citizenship on the basis that he supposedly has Russian citizenship, according to the Security Service of Ukraine, using pseudo-evidence. He denies this, but he's also being accused of, and here I quote, maintaining links with the Moscow Patriarchate and knowingly acting against the canonical independence of the Ukrainian Church from the Moscow Patriarchate, representatives of which are openly supporting the Russian aggression against Ukraine, end of quote. And this is happening in a country where the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state are enshrined in the Constitution. The medieval Inquisition could have learned a lot from the Zelensky regime when it comes to persecuting dissent and witch hunts. As for our Western colleagues, they're averting their eyes in shame when we point out that these are the kinds of authorities they've given rise to in Ukraine. And today they said absolutely nothing, not a word about this outrageous situation I just mentioned. Something else our Western colleagues are silent on is another part of this witch hunt, which the Kiev princeling is engaged in of late. Having found out that anti-corruption structures independent from the president have prepared compromising material and criminal cases against Zelensky and his inner circle, he used his pocket parliament to ensure that this body now reports to the Prosecutor General's office, who answers to him, the president. Thus, as we speak, his accomplices are destroying documents exposing corruption in the highest echelons of power, including the Kiev usurper and his team, who've spent billions of dollars in budget funds and Western aid. Now, having gotten their hands on this evidence, the evidence that exposes them, they're now backtracking, supposedly in response to a negative uproar in Ukrainian society and abroad. It's worth noting that the bodies that are being struck, The bodies that are being hit were initially set up under Western pressure, portrayed as an antidote to corruption. But we didn't hear anything about that today. I cannot but mention the ravaging of the Hill of Glory memorial complex in Lvov. This can only be construed as desecration of the memory of countless victims of fascism who gave their lives fighting against Nazism. Timeless heroic deeds were done by them, by Soviet citizens. To further their short-term interests, the Ukrainian authorities have obscenely exhumed the remains of 355 Soviet warriors, including heroes of the Soviet Union, who fought for the liberation of Lvov from German fascists. Not one of the civilized Western representatives, nor the UN Secretariat, mustered up the courage to condemn these shameful atrocities committed by Ukrainian neo-atrocities. And this despite the fact that every year in the General Assembly we adopt a resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism and other practices that contribute to the fueling of contemporary racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance, emphasizing that it's unacceptable to destroy memorials and monuments commemorating the heroism of those who fought against Nazism in World War II and the illegal exhumation and transfer of their remains. So why did we convene today's meeting if not to discuss these topics I just mentioned? Well, it was convened to artificially maintain the Ukrainian file afloat at the Security Council, especially against the backdrop of the ongoing slaughter and humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, on which our Western colleagues are much less eloquent. The meeting is also an opportunity to criticize Russia for methodically and consistently destroying military infrastructure and sites related to Ukraine's military capabilities, blowing up warehouses containing Western-supplied ammunition and equipment, striking areas where Ukrainian soldiers, foreign instructors and mercenaries are gathering. In a word, Russia is doing everything it should, given that a war is being waged against it imposed by NATO countries. Does this ritualistic, propaganda-laden paradigm deserve a Security Council being convened? Don't waste your time. Don't waste ours. We destroyed, are destroying, and will continue to destroy the military infrastructure of the Kiev regime as part of our demilitarization of Ukraine, which is one of the objectives of our special military operation. We do not strike civilian objects. These objects are being affected solely due to the activities of the Ukrainian anti-missile defenses stationed in the residential areas of cities in violation of international humanitarian law norms. Ordinary Ukrainians know this full well. They're afraid not of Russian strikes, but of the actions of their own soldiers. They also know that we're not fighting them, we're fighting against the Kiev regime, which has sacrificed its country, together with all Ukrainians, in the name of the West's anti-Russia project. The more you deliver military supplies to Kiev, the more we will strike. It's not our choice. We've been consistently proposing the resolution of the Ukrainian crisis through diplomacy for a long time now. But you won't agree to that. For now, you're ready to continue fighting Russia using Ukraine's hands, and the fact that there are fewer Ukrainians around does not concern you. That's why you're stubbornly trying not to notice the fact that the regime in Kiev, which is completely corrupt, it's trying to save the skins of Zelensky and his posse, putting the future of Ukraine in question. We will discuss this in detail at a separate meeting we've requested for the 31st of July. At that meeting, we suggest focusing on actions which undermine the search for a diplomatic solution to the Ukrainian conflict, including attempts to thwart direct Russo-Ukrainian talks in Istanbul. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for this statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Pakistan. I thank ASG Miroslav Yencha and ASG Msuya for their briefings. Pakistan remains deeply concerned by the continuing hostilities and devastating consequences of this conflict, particularly its humanitarian dimensions. Into its fourth year now, this conflict has exacted a harrowing human cost, with millions displaced, lives and livelihoods shattered, and widespread civilian infrastructure damaged. Its protracted nature has vividly laid out that war spares no one, and its effects threaten peace and stability far beyond the region. It is unfortunate that despite the diplomatic efforts at the start of the year, including Security Council Resolution 2774 and multiple limited ceasefire understandings, tangible progress has remained elusive. While prisoner exchanges and talks in Istanbul offer glimmer of hope, the ongoing violence, death, and destruction from relentless attacks has continued to cast a shadow over the nascent and fledgling peace efforts. It is imperative that the echoes for peace must be heard. Peace in Ukraine is long overdue. The calls for ending this conflict should not be allowed to be muted by the continued drums of war. In this context, Pakistan reiterates the following urgent imperatives. First, the protection of civilians is a must. The international humanitarian law is clear, and it is vital that it must be upheld unconditionally. Targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure under any pretext cannot be justified. Second, military solution and continued escalation is akin to pursuing a dead end. Continued attacks and the recent surge in these attacks has only deepened the suffering of people affected by this conflict. Sustainable peace demands de-escalation, ceasefire, and unwavering commitment to dialogue. Third, peaceful settlement must be our Lord Star. That is our commitment expressed in Resolution 2788 adopted earlier this week. Diplomacy is the only path forward. We welcome the talks between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. These, however, must translate into tangible de-escalation, and steps such as prisoner swaps should catalyze broader political negotiations aimed at ending this conflict. Pakistan has been a consistent advocate for peace. From the very outset, we have called for de-escalation and giving primacy to dialogue and diplomacy. Only a sincere and meaningful dialogue which addresses security concerns of all sides is anchored in the principles of UN Charter and international law and respects the relevant multilateral agreements can help lead to peace that is just and enduring. Pakistan stands ready to support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine conflict. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give you the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would like to reply to the assertion that the United States made, and I quote, groundless accusations, and that somehow this was a misuse of the Council. I reject these allegations. The United States has raised pertinent information, and in a case in point today, we noted that materials and components supplied by China are ending up in Russian weapons, weapons which Russia is using to strike Ukraine, killing Ukrainian civilians, and destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. If China is sincere in calling for peace, it should stop fueling Russia's aggression. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and the representative of China has asked for the floor now to make a further statement. I give you the floor, sir.
Thank you, President. I'll be very brief. China on the issue of Ukraine our position has been repeated so many times. We are calling for a ceasefire, and we're committed to promoting peace talks. China's efforts have been seen by all. For the U.S., I would like to say that there are so many hotspot conflicts and complex international situations. The international community needs cooperation and solidarity instead of diversion and confrontation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of China for those further remarks. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to express Ukraine's sincere appreciation to the Presidency of Pakistan for convening today's meeting. We are also grateful to ASG Miroslav Yanchar and ASG Joyce Msuya for their insightful briefings. Tragically, since the last meeting of the Security Council in June, the security situation in Ukraine has not improved. On the contrary, the Russian Federation has intensified its campaign of terror through relentless drone and missile strikes, deliberately targeting civilians across our country. This month, each massive attack by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure has broken previous records in the number of missiles, drones, and bombs used, resulting in further civilian casualties and destruction. Ukraine strives to ensure that the world hears the story of every life lost as a result of Russia's illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified war of aggression. Each life is irreplaceable, a profound loss that can never be undone. Allow me to share one of, unfortunately, many such stories. This month, in the village of Pravdane in Kherson region, a Russian drone strike claimed the life of Dmytro, a boy just 1 year and 1 month old, as he stayed in his great-grandmother's home. The Russian military's use of FPV drones to kill people, children, has become increasingly widespread, a tactic that epitomizes the cruelty of this war of aggression. Russia's continued assault on civilians underscores the urgent need for sustained and increased international support to protect Ukraine's population. We are profoundly grateful to all partners providing air defense systems and other essential security assistance. We urge the continued and expanded supply of these vital capabilities, because for millions of Ukrainians, these systems are the difference between life and death. Enhanced military support to Ukraine is vital and is not designed to prolong the war, as the Russian side falsely claims, and will do so next week at this chamber. On the contrary, this assistance helps to stop Russia's war of aggression. If the aggressor state does not feel the consequences on its own territory, it will never stop its colonial war. Mr. President, while the Security Council meets every month and discusses the Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia gradually continues its efforts to legitimize the temporary occupation of Ukrainian territories through the systematic militarization, indoctrination, and assimilation of Ukrainian children and youth. Under the guise of educational and so-called patriotic programs, Russia enforces a policy of Russification, implements its nationalist agenda, integrates local youth into its military structures, and cultivates loyalty to the Kremlin's regime, all while attempting to erase Ukrainian identity. A key component of this policy is the involvement of children and adolescents in paramilitary organizations. Through state-run movements such as UNArmia, Young Army, and the Movement of the First, the Russian Federation is building a mobilization reserve to sustain its war of aggression not only against Ukraine, but also against what it labels the collective West and other perceived adversaries. These actions constitute clear violations of Russia's obligations as the occupying power under international humanitarian law, as well as international human rights law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Russia is exploiting education and leisure spaces meant for development and growth to indoctrinate and militarize children whose worldviews are still forming. They are being turned into tools of war propaganda within a system disturbingly reminiscent of North Korea. We call on the international community to confront these egregious violations and to hold the Russian Federation accountable for its systematic attempts to normalize war of aggression, temporary occupation of the territory of Ukraine, and the instrumentalization of children in its war efforts. Mr. President, the Russian Federation continues to pursue criminal policies aimed at forcibly altering the demographic composition of Ukraine's temporarily occupied territories. Under the pretense of mortgage and housing assistance, Russia is actively resettling its own citizens into these areas, a strategy designed to entrench its temporary occupation of the territory of Ukraine and undermine the rights of the local population. Through a preferential mortgage program, the Kremlin has created favorable conditions for Russian citizens, including military personnel, educators, families with young children, and workers in the cultural and social sectors, to purchase property in the temporarily occupied regions of Ukraine. This program is available exclusively to Russian citizens, effectively excluding Ukrainians and using housing as a coercive tool to pressure them into accepting so-called Russian passports. Furthermore, the Kremlin has drafted legislation setting out procedures for the administrative, that is, forced expulsion of so-called foreigners residing in the temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation territory of Ukraine who have not regularized their legal status under Russian law. In reality, this includes Ukrainian citizens who, through no fault of their own, remained in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine but refused to accept Russian citizenship. These individuals are now labeled disloyal and deemed a threat to the Russian occupation administration and are therefore subject to expulsion from their own country. These actions represent a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. There must be no normalization of aggression through normalization of relations with the aggressor state, the Russian Federation, for as long as it continues to pursue imperialistic ambitions. And you have just witnessed how maniacal Russia is about Ukraine. Nor can there be normalization of Russia's perception as an influential power. Influence cannot be divorced from responsibility. As the renowned Ukrainian philosopher Grigory Skovoroda wrote back in the 18th century, I quote, "It is commendable not to be liked by bad people," end of quote. In the case of the Russian Federation, we say it is commendable not to be liked by a rotten state. Mr. President, it has been 136 days since the United States have put forward a proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine has accepted it and has been consistently demonstrating readiness for diplomatic engagement. Ukraine has a clear political will. We remain open to any format that offers a path toward comprehensive, just, and lasting peace for Ukraine. By contrast, the Russian regime continues to show blatant contempt for diplomacy. It consistently rejects credible peace proposals and ignores repeated calls for a full and unconditional ceasefire. Russia could end this war at any moment. Instead, it chooses escalation, launching strikes on peaceful cities and intensifying offensive operations in pursuit of military advantage. Russia also uses peace efforts to spread in manipulative narratives. Following a recent negotiation round held in Istanbul on July 23, its representatives made misleading public claims regarding the initial list of abducted children submitted earlier by Ukraine. We must clarify these facts. This initial list of 339 names was submitted by Ukraine as a confidence-building measure. To date, Russia has provided fragmented responses, offering partial information on fewer than 1/5 of the children. There has been no response at all concerning over 200 children, including those from the Kherson orphanage. Russia mentioned children from the list allegedly returned. In fact, only 6 children were returned, 5 of whom are siblings. This was the result of a year-long humanitarian effort mediated by the state of Qatar, a process demonstrating the power of third-party engagement and not Russian goodwill. The Kremlin continues to expand its war of aggression against Ukraine, drawing others into its campaign of terror, including the use of North Korean troops and Iranian-manufactured weapons. We therefore call on the United States and the international community to intensify coordinated pressure on the regime in Moscow and its military-industrial complex, as well as on those around the world who support and enable Russia's war of aggression effort. The time for action is now, and there is no room for delay. Mr. President, the Russian Federation has been extensively and systematically using anti-personnel landmines as a method of warfare against Ukraine's security and defense forces. When Ukraine signed and ratified the Ottawa Convention, it did so in good faith, relying on security assurances provided by the parties to the Budapest Memorandum. It could not have foreseen that a signatory to that very memorandum, the Russian Federation, would later on launch a legal, unprovoked, and unjustified full-scale military invasion of Ukraine. As a result of Russia's widespread use of landmines, Ukraine has found itself in an unequal and unjust situation that severely constrains its inherent right to self-defense as guaranteed by Article 51 of the UN Charter. Accordingly, and in line with Article 62 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Ukraine has taken difficult but necessary decision to suspend the operation of the 1997 Ottawa Convention. Mr. President, as none of the sovereign and independent member states of the United Nations would, nor will Ukraine accept the temporary occupation by the Russian Federation of any part of its sovereign territory. Ukraine seeks a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, one rooted in the principles of the United Charter and backed by credible, binding, and long-term security guarantees. A full, immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire for at least 30 days remains a critical first step. It is the foundation for halting the war of aggression, restoring confidence, and enabling meaningful negotiations. At the last meeting in Istanbul, Ukraine clearly advocated for such a ceasefire. We also emphasized the importance of a high-level summit between leaders to lay the groundwork for a durable and comprehensive peace. Ukraine stands ready to convene such summit meeting till the end of August. The Security Council has a critical role to play at this juncture by expressing its unequivocal position on the urgent need to terminate hostilities as the first step towards comprehensive, just, and lasting peace for Ukraine on the basis of the UN Charter. In this context, we reiterate our call to the Council to adopt without delay a resolution demanding an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine strongly encourages all members of the Council to support and engage in moving forward this crucial initiative, thereby demonstrating a credible commitment to ending the war of aggression started by the Russian Federation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank you for convening this meeting and the briefers for their important interventions. As Russia is persistently and brutally continuing to wage its unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, let me draw your attention to 4 critical points. First, recently we have witnessed a significant intensification of Russia's military campaign. Growing pressure along the front line is being reported, accompanied by the intense air raids